Welcome to a new episode of These Go to 11. Let's turn it up. Hey everybody, welcome back to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. This not only helps us to get our content out there, but also helps us to find out what you, our faithful listeners, think. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to These Go to 11. Once again, I'm Nathan Bell. Joining me as always, Greg Dutcher. Greg, what's going on, man?
Man, going well. This is going out, like mid-March, right? We're going out the 18th.
18th, yep.
So, you know me, I'm doing good. We're 2 days away from spring, man.
Yeah, and I am less than a week away from spring break.
Oh! So nice.
Super excited about that.
So nice. So I got to ask, dude, this is rare. Normally spring break in the classical Christian school, which you teach, coincides with Easter.
Yes.
But it's late this year.
Easter is so late this year that we were able to manipulate the calendar.
Nice.
Take a spring break, and then we've got actually a legit Easter break.
That's nice.
We have Monday, Thursday,
yep,
Good Friday, and then Easter Monday off. So 5 full days off.
I'm confused, dude. How do you have off 2 Mondays? You said Monday, Thursday. Oh, Maundy, Thursday. Yeah, you could ask me what that means, but I'll have to look it up again. Every year we talk about that, and I'm like, oh, yeah, what is the vernacular and such? But actually, that worked out great.
It did. Yeah, it was excellent. So very excited to be getting 2 breaks coming at the, really one coming right at the tail end of third quarter, and then the other one just a few weeks into fourth quarter. So
that's great, dude.
Yep.
And I benefited this week because, I'm teaching a couple of courses at Towson, and it's their spring break this current week, the week this drops, the week we're recording.
Nice.
So you can hold me accountable, dude. I was going to catch up on all my grading. Often that means I catch up on all my Reacher
binge watching
and Severance. So I'm going to try to get some grading in there too.
Nice.
But yeah, dude. So it's great. I always love this time of year. Everything ahead of us is nice.
Yep.
It's spring. It's summer, dude. It's baseball for me. There's a lot of good coming up. So and there's good coming up. Watch this professional transition. There's good coming up in this podcast right now.
That's right. There you go, man.
Come on.
What a professional.
I mean,
we are in March. We are not theoretically, we are 2 weeks in March. Theoretically, we were supposed to be 2 podcasts at this point.
That's right.
But we took 2 and consolidated into 1, so an hour and a half one, because like a few other podcasts on this particular podcast show, they may or may not have been recorded and then gone into the ether that is the interwebs.
Yes. We just hope in those things, dude, that the conversations blessed each other.
That's right.
And God heard them and said, yeah, they were good for you guys, but nobody else. I don't know.
That's right.
That's happened a few times, dude. That's just, I'm sure we are not the first podcast.
I feel like that's every time we talk. That's good for you guys.
Good for you. But today we force others to eavesdrop.
That's right.
There's got to be some good stuff here. And no, I'm excited. I know we're talking about objections tonight after a pretty thorough podcast. Dude, my brain hurt.
Yeah.
After last week, I'm driving out of here. Actually, I drove you home last week, right?
You did, yeah.
We're chatting, and probably that whole ride back, I was thinking, I need to watch something mindless, eat a bowl of ice cream as I watch something mindless. But
what was it? The old '80s show, the Great American Hero, the Greatest American Hero.
Yes, dude.
Believe it or not.
Look at what's happened. Oh, I love it, man. Hey, a quick ADHD moment. You remember the interesting trivia about that? Now, you weren't living through it, dude. I mean, you were a baby, I believe, when this happened.
Yep.
Actually, dude, weren't you born in 82?
81.
81. So, but the end of 81, because it was
correct.
Like Christmas of 81.
Yep.
So this was, I believe, March of 81 is when Reagan was shot.
Yes.
And I remember getting on the school bus. So different now, because I was a 5th grader, I guess, and a lot of 5th graders today would probably have phones or somebody who has one.
Yeah.
And you would know. So we were just hearing that Reagan had been shot. I think we heard it in school, and then our bus driver was telling us about it. I mean, what a huge deal.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, huge. And, all that settled, and obviously Reagan pulled through. He had the great one-liners there. I think he told the surgeon, I sure hope you guys are Republican.
Right.
Kind of, and from what I remember, I think that was a fairly serious injury.
Yeah.
Like his surgery was pretty extensive.
Yeah, it barely, from what I remember, it barely missed his aorta.
I think that's right. And so it was the true definition of a close call because he obviously needed surgery.
Yep.
Anyway, all that to just say, Hinckley is the guy who shot him.
Yeah.
Remember the dude who was obsessed with Jodie Foster?
Yep.
There was a lot of weird little details to that, and I think if I remember rightly, it was almost like he wanted to impress Jodie Foster.
Yeah, something like that.
Shooting the president, just very, obviously a very mentally suffering person. And his name was Hinckley. I believe, was it John Hinckley?
John Hinckley, yep.
That was the name, or the last name of the main character on Greatest American Hero, which at that time was a huge show.
Yeah.
So they came back after a break, and he had a different last name.
Yeah.
I can't remember it. It was similar. It might have been Henderson, or it was an H. But think about it. I mean, that's where life changed pop culture because you just can't have a dude.
Well, dude, you remember we started the podcast back in 2015.
Yeah, 10 years.
Was it 2016 or 2017? I mean, it might have been 2015 when ISIS became a thing.
Yeah.
And if you remember the show Archer,
right,
the villain, like the bad company, the bad villain company was ISIS.
Where they were ISIS,
and they ended up changing it after the real ISIS, the terrorist group ISIS, came out. They ended up changing.
That's right.
That as well.
Yeah, that's right. No, ISIS was like the CIA on that show, right?
Yeah,
because Archer worked. Because he worked for ISIS, and it stood for International Spies. I don't know. They were espionage guys. Yeah, that's true. You do see that. And how strange sometimes. So anyway, I know that's not what we're talking about.
Nope.
But we're always looking for some little tidbit just to kind of break the ice. And there we go.
There it is. But yeah, we are in apologetics. And so this week we are talking about objections to Christianity. And so what we've done is we've just a little bit of research, 20 of the most common objections that people have. Excuse me. Some of these we went through last week, right? Some of these deal with the inerrancy of Scripture, inconsistencies, things like that. So, Greg, my thinking is we're just going to start at number one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Work our way down, and then if we get to one that we've already touched on, we're just going to say, hey, don't forget, reference our other podcast, and you'll find that contradiction we already talked about there.
Sounds good. And dude, if I forget and I start rehashing stuff from last week, just say, hey, Dutcher, shut up. You did this last week.
We did this already.
Yeah.
All right. The first one, this is a really good one, right? The problem of evil. If God is all powerful and all good, why does evil exist?
Yeah.
So, Greg?
Pass.
Rock, paper, scissors?
I'm doing the... wasn't
Rock,
that
paper,
SNL?
scissors, shoot.
Wasn't that the Bush Gore when I think Will Ferrell? I think it's the first time he brought Bush to light in those SNL 2000 debates, and I remember it was a question, and he was like, pass.
You're right.
Which they told him, no, you can't pass, sir. You can't pass in a presidential debate. No, obviously, dude, in one sense, we didn't do this from an apologetic standpoint, but our January and February to start this year, both in our preaching series at church and our kind of corresponding theme with the podcast.
Yeah.
We were essentially exploring that issue.
Yep.
A little less so from the skeptics' view, though.
Yeah.
This was a little more, but the reason I say that is this is not something like, hey, this is no problem for the believer.
Right.
It's just a problem for the skeptic.
Right.
We're not saying that. It's a problem. The reason they call it the problem of evil is it is a problem. So I would say the first thing that I always do when this issue comes up, and it comes up in so many ways, sometimes as simple as that, hey, if there's a God and he's good, why does bad stuff happen?
Yep.
Or it might be a little more personal, my mother was the most sacrificial person in the world. All she wanted to do was help people, and then when she was 46, she got cancer and suffered horribly and died. And there's so many ways people can come at this, theoretically, but eventually it's going to be practical for all of us. Again, I think you honor the objection. I don't ever want to just bypass it. You honor the objection from the standpoint of saying, I hear you.
Yeah.
I struggle too.
Yeah.
And then I would say, here's the really cool thing. This isn't like because I think people throw that out sometimes, any objection really, ooh, is this something that Christianity overlooked?
Right.
And
right.
No, not at all. It is a central theme in both of its sacred testaments.
Yep.
You see it in the Psalms again and again and again. You see it in the narratives of the Old Testament. And even when the New Testament quotes the Old Testament with the slaughter of the children at, what we think of as a Christmas story, a dark Christmas story, when Herod wanted to eradicate this Messiah. They quote the Old Testament. Rachel was weeping for her children because they were no more, and she would not be comforted. And, we see the grief and the pain. You see the story of Job. You see the New Testament. You see the followers of Jesus suffer. Oh, most importantly, we see Jesus suffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
My God, why have you forsaken me? So I think the very first thing to say is, listen, this is not something that the architects of the Christian faith, oh man, we forgot to do the electrical.
Right.
We built this whole house and didn't put in any electrical units in it. We forgot the plumbing. Not at all.
Yep.
It's smack dab in the middle of the story and says, come and behold.
Yes.
So I would say before we even get to it, I think it's important to let people know, not in a gotcha way, but in an invitational way, what you're experiencing, the most ardent, passionate, zealous, and devoted followers of Christ can relate to you.
Yeah.
And have voiced these things. I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I think 100%, right? That this isn't, to your point, this isn't just the question that believers have to answer, right? This is also the question that the skeptic has to answer.
Of course.
Right? So, for the believer, when the answer comes, we know ultimately that all evil will be done away with. Yeah. Right? The question for the skeptic is, what happens to evil in your construct of the world?
Right.
Right. And I think it's fair to answer questions. One of the things that I remind my students of when doing apologetics is more effective than answering the question, though, is asking questions.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? It's like
the old Socratic method.
Yeah, ask the question, if God is all powerful and all good, why does evil exist? It's like, that's a great question. Why does evil exist without God?
Right.
And so being able to genuinely ask and probe into that. I think, too, one of the things that to remember is, if God is who he says he is, and he is far above our intellect, far above our wisdom, far above our knowledge, far above our goodness, when we consider and think about that, right, who am I to question? You think about genius minds and the way they've created things, right? You think of Steve Jobs and the way Apple products work and interact with one another, right? Things that kind of go above my understanding. Think about, those who harnessed the atom, right? Oppenheimer came out 2 years ago now, is it? Or
I think it was 2 summers ago, I believe.
The minds that were working on that, things that, I don't understand, right? Or have a very rudimentary understanding of. And they're working with less than I have now because of their work that they did. Yeah. If that's true, right, how much more is God above us? And so when we look at things like that, right, there's a point where we ask the honest question, why God? Yeah. But then we also have to come to a point where it's like, well, wait a minute, God is God.
Right.
And his understanding of the way things work and his his knowledge, his experience, his wisdom, his power, all of those things, his goodness.
Yeah.
All of those things play into that. And at some point, there has to be an acknowledgement that there are things that I just will not be able to understand and comprehend, right? No matter what answers I lay out, no matter what I try to do to comfort myself or someone else, ultimately at the end of the day, right, if you're looking at why did this child die, or why did this child suffer and then die?
Yeah.
Why did this loved one suffer and then die? I mean, all the answers in the world, right, when you break it down, aren't going to stop the problem, right? It's not going to cause the problem to go away.
Yep.
And so at some point, there has to be an element where we say, God has the answer.
Yeah.
Right? We go back to Deuteronomy 29:29.
Secret things.
Yep. And so, like, do I want to be able to pinpoint and say, oh, this is what God is doing, or this is what God did, and maybe someday I will, right?
Dude, I think you're spot on, because I think what makes this issue so difficult is the assumption that everybody brings to it, because it's all we know. You almost get into some strange like trans-dimensional science talk here.
Yeah.
Like I'm saying, you've heard people sometimes say, if you have to illustrate it because you can't actually show it. But if this sheet of paper is a two-dimensional space, the stick figure person could move side to side, up and down, but they couldn't move through and in and out of the paper. We're a one-dimensional person, so if you put your finger on it, they would probably just see a straight line. There's a dimension to us that the two-dimensional can't see, can't conceive of. So yes, the idea of this is what I would say: if we could come up with an answer, why didn't somebody tell me that? It would bear the fingerprints of human invention. It would probably be quite trite, quite cliche, which is why I'm always hard pressed to look at these things. But I do think we can get specific and say, I think one of the reasons is a problem is because we don't know.
Yeah.
The eternality, I'm going to use that really big word, the eternal nature of God, because we are by definition finite.
Yeah.
We once were not.
Right.
And then we were.
Yeah.
He has always been. There was never a time he was not. So the concept of time, duration of time, we absolutize this earthly life as it.
Yeah.
We might pay a little bit of lip service, maybe the afterlife, etc. But I've just come to believe over time, Nathan, that there's something about the nature of time and death and suffering and pain, which God clearly is on the record as caring about.
Yeah.
In no means do I want to go the old deistic route here.
No.
Oh, he's off, not worried about it. No, he's deeply invested in it. We see it in the experience of his own son. The wonderful psalm, right? I've kept your tears in bottles, right? Absolutely. I mean, and the freedom for people to cry and receive the comfort of God in their pain and their struggle. So we have that joy, but there's still something about the nature of time. Yeah. I could give a few analogies. They're always going to fall short because they're three-dimensional analogies in our world. But to the degree that we can start thinking in a certain direction and then let faith kind of take over at some point, there's things our children don't understand. Yeah. They don't understand. Oh my goodness, I can't remember the amount of times my kids were little and the doctor has to poke and prod and pull out a big needle, and we're right there. Why isn't Dad stopping this? Right. Why isn't Mom stopping this? Right. We know and experience something they don't. This is part of their duration. Yeah. Now, you care, you hate it. Yeah. If there was a way around it, you would, but there isn't. By no means is that a perfect analogy. I can think of several places where it breaks down. But to me, it leads a little bit to, okay, the parent's perspective different than the child's. Yeah. And I find that is deeply unsatisfying to the person in the fresh grip of grief. Yeah. So I'm not sharing it. Right. This is something that would come much, much later after reflection. But the reason it is a problem when we lock ourselves into the here and now, dude. If I have video of Nathan Bell,
Yeah.
and he's sitting by the pool one day, and you're sitting there, dude, you're eating your favorite food, you're drinking your favorite beverage, and you're in a nice lounge chair, you got some time off work, and there's a kid in the pool who starts drowning. And you see him, and you go on, you're eating your snack, and you're reading your book, you're listening to your music.
Where's this kid's parents?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're looking around, and then the kid drowns. Now, we get video of that. We are incensed.
Right.
Because unless, Nathan, you could tell us that you were in a hallucinogenic state.
Right.
Or your legs and arms were actually broken. We couldn't see it in the video. And
my snack was mushrooms.
Yeah. You're mushroom. I thought the kid was a cartoon character. I thought he was a Ninja Turtle or something. Some crazy idea. The reason that we are so incensed is because you have the power to save that kid. So there must be something wrong with your heart and your emotions. Your empathy is broken. Or because you're in a body cast, Nathan wanted to. There's just nothing he could do. Okay, that's but we would be incensed because we're assuming you're a human being.
Yeah.
That should have normal human emotions and the full ability to help. So again, what do we say about God? He's all loving and all powerful. So suffering doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And I would just say that is very, it's a sacred objection because it's enshrined in Scripture. But when we look back at it, we think, so what is it?
Yeah.
And what I have tried to focus on is God communicates his goodness and his love. I believe ultimately, and this is why the cross is so meaningful, through the historically documented, real, easy to confirm fact that Jesus died for me. That's the logic and the language of Romans 5:8.
Yeah.
God, present tense, demonstrates his love for us in what? That in this current moment, my experiences are good. Well, they might be, but they might not be.
Yeah.
But it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
Because God expresses, present tense, his love in the fact. So we can always look at what my son did. This is how much I love you.
Yeah.
And what was the son doing? He's gaining the eternal Revelation 21:4 world. No more crying, suffering, and death. So that's ultimately what I would try to help a person get to.
Yeah.
You don't get people there. We don't get there in a few sound bites.
No.
That's why we're for the sake of this podcast, we're highlighting a few things.
Right.
But we can't stress enough that there needs to be space and grace and time.
Yes.
But I do think those are the truths we get to. And like you said, Nathan, at the end of the day, there's something about God I don't understand.
Yeah.
But why do I know he's all powerful, he's all loving? Because of the cross.
Yep.
Because he found the way to save the human race without compromising his justice.
Yeah.
Without diminishing his love for us a single ounce in the perfect expression of what Jesus did on the cross. Oh, which by the way tells me God participates in the suffering that we experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at some point, if somebody says that's unsatisfying, I say, I understand, but I would just urge you to dwell on it. And I will say, is there another faith like this anywhere?
Yeah.
And I will argue no.
Yeah.
It's exclusive to the Christian faith.
Yeah. I think the argument of pain and suffering to your point and what you said earlier, this isn't a conversation that you can necessarily have with someone who's in the midst of pain and suffering.
I don't think
right?
so.
It's a conversation that you need to have in the academic realm to walk through those things. But when somebody's in the midst of suffering, right, that's where, being with them is the most important thing, right? That's where just sitting with them and even, relying on the fact that, you honestly don't know why God does the things that he does. Just saying, I don't know. Life is hard, right? That admitting it, agreeing with them, and showing them that you're willing to walk with them side by side. So.
Absolutely, dude. And that one, I knew we couldn't knock out quickly.
Right.
I mean, it's quick in general, but
Yeah.
I thought that one was worth giving a little more time.
Agreed, 100%. The next one's going to be easy. I think we'll be able to sail right through it. Contradictions in the Bible. People argue that the Bible contains inconsistencies and contradictions. We talked about that at great length in last week's podcast. And so, again, that's one we just encourage you, go back, listen to that one, because we do touch on that one.
Although, dude, did we? Or is it the one that we lost?
No, we touched on that one.
We did.
Because the two-parter, one was the objections to the Bible.
Right.
We just combined those two into one.
Okay.
Yep.
Because I remember at one of the podcasts, maybe it was just a different example. I'll say it really quick.
Yeah, go for it.
If it's redundant.
Absolutely.
Normally, when you examine the alleged contradictions, what I have found, and I just will personally testify, and I think you would too, Nathan, studying the Bible for decades.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm always amazed how there's usually something that we're bringing without knowing it.
Yeah.
A contradiction to be a contradiction. It's a syllogism. If you're teaching logic, which you know about, and you're actually looking at logic, it's almost scientific. There has to be an irreconcilable problem.
Yes.
For there to be a true contradiction. Often, I think what people call contradictions, there's something we often don't know.
Yep.
That, well, upon further reflection, sometimes it's an archaeological discovery. Sometimes it's a linguistic discovery.
Yeah.
Oh, sometimes it might be a copy issue. There's so many ways. So the example that I know I gave, and maybe last week, maybe the week before, is the one.
Grandma's cookies.
Yeah, we talked about Grandma's cookies. That was a little more for the historicity of Scripture. But I'm thinking of like events. Okay, is Jesus leaving Jericho or entering Jericho? And the blind man, Bartimaeus.
Yes, yep.
In Mark 10, he's mentioned. But in Matthew's Gospel, it's two blind men. It's one, and then it's two. And the example I know I gave is if you ran into me and Lisa at the mall, remember, and somebody says, yeah, Greg and Lisa Dutcher, and you say, I just saw them the other day. Yeah. And then the next day, somebody says, yeah, Greg Dutcher, you're like, I just saw Greg at the mall. No, I can tell you, he knows about that date. He mentioned it. You could look at that and say, wait a minute. Did Nathan run into Greg and Lisa or Greg? Well, if you said, yeah, I ran into Greg and only Greg and nobody else was with him, right? You have a contradiction. Yes. The texts that often people look to do not say that. Yeah. And if anything, they bear the authenticity of eyewitness account. Yes. Where we tell the story. Sometimes this person mentions two people that were there. Yep. The other person only mentions one. And to your point, right? So let's use that same example of the mall. If you were to then sit the four of us down and ask us what happened at the mall, Greg and Nathan might be there talking about the food court and, that's all we'd be talking about. Right. Where Joy and Lisa could sit there and describe, Greg and Nathan went over to the food court, but we, went to this store and, of course, picked up these things and, then came. So it's just, it's the perspective and what's important to the person in what they're retelling. Yes. And that's why I think you see sometimes, dude, why is it we have more medical stories, more healings in Luke? Well, Luke was a physician. Yeah. It's of great interest to him. Luke also seemed to have a fascination with marginal people on the margins. Yeah. Not that Matthew and John don't tell us those same stories. Yeah. Or Mark, but Luke tells us a lot of those stories. More about women, more about children, etc. Because sometimes the vested interest of the writer comes out. Yeah. So the good researcher gets a composite picture. Yes. Of all the strands, and if something has to be a contradiction, it's there. And I'm happy to say, dude, we could give so many examples. But you're in film writing, and so if you and I were to watch Breaking Bad, right, or you were to watch it for the 20th time, and I were to watch it for the first time, exactly. Well, I'm still praying, brother. And then someone were to come and say, okay. I want you, Greg, to write Breaking Bad, and I want you to write a summary of the entire show from the perspective of the depravity of man. Yeah. Right?
you would do that, right?
Yep.
That's your goal. That's your assignment. That's the perspective you're going to take. Nathan, I want you to write it from the perspective of the anti-hero. Right?
Yep.
So are we going to be talking about the same show?
Of course.
Yes. But the perspectives on what we're noticing and what we're bringing out are going to be different.
Yep.
And so to your point, right, Luke is writing from the perspective of a physician. So he's going to write those things that are noticed there. Matthew's not writing from the perspective of a physician.
Yeah.
Same stories, same events are going on, but his focus is different, and his focus is actually to the Jews.
Yep, exactly.
It's to his people. And so he's going to be writing this letter to his people.
Which is why you see like you look at the first 2 chapters of Matthew, and you've got 4. He's very intent on showing how the events around Jesus' birth fulfill 4 Old Testament prophecies.
Yeah.
You don't get that in Mark.
Yeah.
You don't. It Mark, you jump right to the baptism.
Right.
So there were different purposes.
Yeah.
So you look for the composite picture. Good.
Awesome.
Sorry that was all redundant, but we're taking a wild stab in the dark here.
This is our podcast. We
Exactly.
can do what we want.
We can do it, and if you turn it off, we'll just cry. So please don't.
All right. Next objection. Science versus religion. Some believe that science and the theory of evolution contradict the Bible and the creation account.
Oh, yeah. Science is always a big one. It gives me a moment to talk about the 1985 movie Weird Science with Anthony Michael Hall.
A young Bill Pullman.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
He played the douchey brother.
Yes, that's right. The jerky brother. Doesn't he get turned into like a piece of poop or something? Yeah, it was like a gross thing I remember at the end.
Kelly LeBrock was
Kelly LeBrock, because remember, she was all the rage.
Yep.
She was sort of the heart, the I can't really call a girl a heartthrob, the beauty queen of 80s movies. And she kind of disappeared after a while. I feel like I don't know what happened to her.
Yeah.
But, I'm dodging the question because I don't think the question was about weird science, but I saw an 80s moment, and I'm going to take it.
Absolutely.
I mean, a couple of things here. First of all, to go back to things we've established many times, I think, in the past, the Bible's purpose is not to teach science. I think we would agree that the Bible's purpose is to reveal the person of God, the will of God, the heart of God, the plan that he has for man, which is ultimately to be reconciled to him, the dangers of living outside of him, living outside of his will. We know that's the ultimate purpose. Yet, we also say whatever the Bible touches on, when it touches on matters of science, when it touches on matters of history, it's true.
Yes.
The Bible is true. It is, to go back to what we talked about, inerrant. It's without error. But I'm kind of emphasizing the infallibility piece. What is it seeking to accomplish?
Yes.
So let's get right to it with Genesis 1 and 2. Genesis 1 in particular.
Yeah.
Source of enormous disagreement among very sincere Bible-believing Christians that love God, love his word. And you've got all kinds of gradations of difference, sometimes even in the same camp. You've got young earth creationists. I read something recently, young earth creationists that argue for like 4,000 BC.
Yeah.
That's great. Some say 6,000, some say 10,000. And there's usually the way you would read the genealogies of Genesis.
Right.
So all of those would be considered like young earth creation perspectives.
Yeah.
But within that, you've got, and you can have some really robust debates.
Yeah.
And then you've got people that are old earth creationists, like I think Francis Schaeffer rolled that way. I think Lee Strobel certainly leaned that way. But these are men and women that love the Bible, believe it's true, believe it's God's word. So they're trying to deal with the data. I would say this. This often gets overlooked. While I don't embrace evolution, I know you don't either, I will say that I believe C.S. Lewis was open to it enough, if you read Mere Christianity, and while I would passionately have debated that with him, which seems very arrogant to say about C.S. Lewis, but I'm very confident that I would have debated that issue with him and would have wanted to know. I believe Lewis was one of us.
Yeah.
So I think you can be wrong on an issue like that. The issue of a particular aspect of creation, a theology of creation, is important. but it should not be considered a game changer.
Yeah.
And there are people that do.
Yeah.
And we'll let that land there.
Well, in fairness, and this is what I think people who hear these sound bites and these sound clips and I'm not going to say it. They put their faith and trust in other teachers that are for a young earth and things like that. Do you realize that before Darwin, this was debated for thousands of years before Christians, and it wasn't a big deal?
Yeah.
Like, there were Christians who were like, oh, yeah, the earth is really old. Oh, no, the earth is really young. And it was like, okay, whatever. And Darwin comes along, and all of a sudden now it's a hot button topic for people.
Yeah.
And really, if you look at the history of Christianity, it wasn't a game changer. It wasn't a big deal. And now all of a sudden Darwin comes along, and instead of attacking the issues with really where Darwin places change and things like that, we all of a sudden start attacking young or old earth. And it's like, really? Can't we just go back to where it was like, you believe it's young, I believe it's old. Ultimately, what we agree is that it didn't happen by itself.
Right.
And that's really, to me, that's the heart of Genesis, right? In the beginning, God.
Yeah.
If there's an apologetic in Genesis, right, for creation, that's it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's not, was a day 1,000 years, was 1,000 years a day, it's not that. It's in the beginning, God. No one else has been able to replicate taking nothing and making something.
Ex nihilo, absolutely. And I think that's the key, dude. Science, that's where I try to take it.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before. I try to defer if it's a really specific issue. I say, listen, there's some really wonderful Christian thinkers and writers that know a lot more about this than I do.
Yeah.
I don't. I was never a great science guy. But if I can get a person there, most people can get to the origin issue.
Yeah.
There was something or there was nothing.
Yeah.
Right? But we all agree there's something now.
Right.
So did that something now get here from nothing? I mean, yes, somebody could say that in a much more erudite way.
Right.
But in a sense, I would always say it seems to make a lot more sense that intelligence would explain the data more than nothingness.
Right.
Or just raw material, which is somethingness. Because how did it get there? Either way, both parties have a problem.
Yes.
The question of how did the first thing come to be?
Right.
But since everybody has that problem, intelligence explains a lot more.
Right.
So that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's good. Next, hypocrisy of Christians. Oh, this is a good one. Many point out the failures or immoral actions of Christians or church leaders. I'll go ahead and jump in and start this one.
Yeah.
So does the Bible.
Yes. That's a great, well, it's the old, I've heard it, you've heard it so many times, dude. This is the only deal where the requirement for admission is to be a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Right? Is to be something that we don't want to be.
Yeah.
Because most people say, whether you're a spiritual or religious person or not, hey, ask most just guys you meet on the street, hey, you married? You got kids? Yeah. Do you think you're do you always think you're the dad you should be or the husband you should be? Most people are going to say, no, I try to be, but sometimes blah, blah, blah. Right. So we're all hypocrites from the start, and that's kind of a requirement for admission, the acknowledgement of that.
Yeah.
And the Bible does call it out. So, yeah, we're not downplaying anything to do with and the reason I keep looking at my phone, I'm just going to tell everybody. My son, one of my two, I'll keep their identity. Because, dude, I'm always going to get a call or a text from a podcast. Well, you know that.
Oh, yeah.
It just always
100%.
happens.
It's part of why we stopped doing video.
Yes, exactly. Is anybody around? Why? Kind of an emergency. There was a mishap at the gas station. I'm covered in gasoline. Oh, no. Where's your brother? At work. Can you get a hold of Mom? I just did. Wow.
I'll let you dig in on that. I'll continue a little bit.
Please do, dude. You can riff on this.
Christ calls that out in the religious leaders all the time, right? You hypocrites, you brood of vipers.
Oh, sure.
Christ is disgusted by the hypocrisy that he sees within, at that time, what were the people of God, right? The Jewish leaders who were supposed to be leading people and pointing them to God. He's disgusted with it. He calls them out on it.
Yeah.
Paul does the same thing in his letters to the churches.
Yep.
Right? When they're not acting the way they should be acting, he makes no bones about it, right? We're told in Galatians, I just went through that book with my students.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a great book. If you want to, look at like sarcasm and the reality in which Paul can speak to people who he's annoyed with.
Yep.
Right, that has it all.
The gloves are off on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, gloves are off, and Peter, right, who is, by all accounts, the one who is going to really be at the forefront of the church movement that's going to happen. He comes in, fist ablazing. Peter has been hypocritical, not just in his treatment of people, but in his treatment of the gospel, right? And nothing will get Paul fired up more than someone being hypocritical when it comes to the gospel. And so Paul is going to lay it out on the line. We're told he does it very publicly.
Yep.
He's not going to pull any punches, and he's just going to lay him out.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always been fascinated by that passage too, Nathan, because I find it oddly comforting because sometimes Peter's story is a little too truncated for me.
Yeah.
I hear a lot of Christians say, well, Peter, it's almost what you could say about David, and then there was the Bathsheba thing.
Right.
Peter was good, except there was the denying Christ thing. I'm like, yeah. And then we see a much more mature Peter still be a flawed, deeply flawed man. And I tend to think if it was an issue that wasn't pertaining to the centrality of the gospel, by Peter pulling away from Gentile converts to Christianity, was sending a message, I believe unintentionally, that the Judaizers are right. Yeah. It is faith plus becoming Jewish, plus following Jewish code, plus adhering to Jewish dietary laws, etc. Faith in Christ plus those things equals salvation, which, Paul starts the book by saying that's pure heresy. It's Christ alone, faith alone in Christ alone. That's the battle cry of Galatians. So that's why he made a public display of it, because there was hypocrisy, which, dude, opens up a whole new chapter. One, I always say, here's the positive side of hypocrisy. We're all hypocrites. Yeah. Which is why we need Jesus. Two, there's a hypocrisy that is very sinister, and there's a hypocrisy that's misguided. So I kind of view three levels. There's just the general, we're sinners. I don't think Peter's was sinister. I think it was deeply misguided and born out of fear, and he needed to be rebuked. And sometimes our hypocrisy is just, man, I took my eye off what I know matters the most. And then there's the kind of hypocrisy where we talk about the double life, a lot of the Christian scandals. Yeah. And the Bible acknowledges that too. Yeah. It condemns it. Yep. So people that often object to Christianity say, oh, that's just a bunch of hypocrites that, judge others and they feel smug because they're God's people or something. I'd say, well, God actually, and I say this on this word, has put enough in Scripture that we can question. Yeah. I'm not even sure that those folks are even legit. Yeah. And that's Jesus that says that, right? We've got passages like 1 John 2, I believe 18. They went out from us because they were not of us, if they had been of us. And again, sometimes that's used a little too willy-nilly. I think you can find people in seasons of great doubt, searching, etc. Doesn't necessarily mean that they've apostatized. Right. But there are some who do. Scripture doesn't hide that from us. Oh, yeah. So the hypocrisy question, I normally will try to tell a person, yeah, man, that's why I need Jesus.
Yeah.
That's why I want him, because he wasn't a hypocrite.
Yeah.
He was the only man who did what he said and said what he did. And every one of us, you might do it less than this guy. She might do it more than her. But we're all falling short.
Right.
So that's my thought on the hypocrisy charge.
Yeah. No, I think that's spot on, right? That's typically always the approach that I've had to that question is, well, that's just humanity.
Yeah.
Right? That's just humanity. I mean, that's why we need Christ, because no one is perfectly themselves and righteously themselves all the time.
Yes, and that's why I think it's good to just say it's Jesus. I think I've told this before, but it's been a while, Nathan. Seminary, there was a dude I met who was just a little off socially. I don't know how else to put it. I believe he was a sincere Christian. He would insult people regularly when he would talk to them. I'm not even sure he always knew that he was doing it. Mm-hmm. And my buddy Ken, I think you've heard me say this, who I roomed with my first year there. We lived in a retired Mennonite. How textbook is this? Mennonite pastor who had a big farmhouse, and he kind of rented out like 4 rooms to seminary students. Yeah, it's pretty cheap. And Pastor Fly, I'm sure he's long gone by now. And my buddy Ken was at the end of the hall, and we would, sometimes at night just kind of meet in this common area and just chat about what we were learning. And he told me this guy, who I'll call John, wasn't his name, was the guy who was kind of jerky. They worked at the Hatfield meatpacking plant together. And John would ridicule a lot of the guys for listening to, like, secular music and rap music, and said, these things don't glorify the Lord. You're going to go to hell. And he would say these things. And they told Ken one night, they're like, Ken, man, we like you. We know you're like a religious guy. But John, man, he's terrible. He's rude to customers. He's rude to us. He's rude to the boss. And what's Ken going to say? He's a fellow brother in Christ. Yeah. And Ken goes, do you think I handled this right? I said, what you saying? He goes, I said, man, I hear you guys. Listen, all I can tell you is, think how bad off John would be if he didn't have Jesus.
Yeah.
and honestly, dude, there's kind of
there's a truth to that.
There is a truth in that, And I never want to use it as a flimsy excuse to just do whatever you want. Nobody's arguing that, but and then okay, Ken looks better in that scenario. Yeah. But you could have a better version of Ken, and guys are trashing Ken because he dropped the ball on something. He didn't handle something well. And you say, yeah, man, think how bad off he'd be without Jesus. That's all of us. C.S. Lewis makes an argument similar to that. And every time I hear that, I always think of Roscoe Adams, right? How just kind and patient and gentle he was. This is a dude that, with or without Christ, is going to be far more kind and patient and gentle than I'm going to be with Christ, 50 years from now. I know. Me too.
His natural personality and disposition was just such
it was sweet.
that's who he was, right? And we need to make allowances for that there are those out there who just, they have a more tender, compassionate personality to them. They have a kinder, and then there are those that really don't, right? They don't have any compassion, any tenderness. And so you ask, okay, if that's the case, then where has Christ brought this person to? Yeah. Right? And not only that, but where is he then going to bring this person 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
It's always about where you started and where you're going. Right, dude, or we'd be, man, if we play the comparison game, why can't I be more like this person or that? And that's kind of the hope. Come to me, Jesus says, all you who are weary and heavy laden. Yeah. And I'll give you rest. So I would just tell, man, I hear you on the hypocrisy thing, dude. It sucks. And I will sometimes say, listen, any hypocrisy that has made Christ less accessible to you, let me just say, including my own, that weighs on my heart. But if anything, use that crap as the backdrop. The way the jeweler sets a black cloth
Yep.
to highlight the beauty of the diamond or the gem.
Yeah.
You know, that I just say that's what I would say. Like I always quote it to it. It's such a simple line from Jurassic Park. But when Sam Neill tells the girl, to me, that's what holds that movie together. The blood-sucking lawyer, remember, he abandons the kids, and, of course, he, they might call in that movie karmic justice, right? He gets eaten off the toilet by the T-Rex, and, oh, my goodness, it's so brutal. And when Sam Neill's trying to get them out of there, she's in shock, and she can't process. And he's like, look at me, dear, look at me. And she goes, oh, he left us, and just looked at us calmly and said, but that's not what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I just love it. So really, the whole movie, really, you could take it from that point. Will he fulfill that commitment to those kids?
Yeah.
And he does. He doesn't. Even when you think they're toast, when the Raptors come in at the end and they're going to take him out. So sometimes all you can say is, I know he hurt you.
Yeah.
I know he abandoned you, and but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
So, dude, that's got me through, man, when I've had to deal with some, less than salutary comments from people, especially that people that are Christians, and I sometimes, well, Jesus, I know you would never say that to me.
Yeah.
And I've told my kids that when I've blown it. I said, guys, your dad loves you to death, but I've blown it. You've seen it. I can promise you, Jesus never blows it.
Right.
He's never going to lose his cool with you, right? So I would say to that person, the skeptic, don't let bad representation blind you to the real deal. Yeah. And let me tell you about him. So
No, I think that's good. I think that's a good one that we're going to go ahead and end on. We're just under an hour now.
Oh, man.
So
kids would say I've been yapping.
Hey,
as they say.
It's all good. So again, just some objections to Christianity. There are so many more out there, obviously. Next week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about questions that we've received over the years from people, some more recently that some have given us, and more like a practical work session, I think.
Yeah.
Because this is, again, just like the objections that we've come up with, just more substantial things. That hopefully you can kind of hang your hat on and say, oh, okay, that sounds good. I think I'll try that next time somebody asks that or says that. So, All right, dude. Until the next time, we just rock the Casbah. Thank you again for listening to These Go to 11, an unchurchy conversation about everyday faith. Once again, please make sure you like, subscribe, and review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you ever find yourself in the Forest Hill, Maryland area, please feel free to stop by at 135 Industry Lane, and you can get all of our service times and information at christfc.org.
These go to 11.